different kashas this time.
Okay. Kum lenen ablat gemara. We are up to the Samach Test Amud Aleph. We are up to the Mishnah. And I said earlier today, Mizrahi, that this Mishnah is very controversial and very relevant halacha l'maisa today. So we're talking about the different categories, classifications, groups of people. We'll see in the Mishnah that actually 10 different categories of people regarding who can marry who. And we also learned the concept of a mamzer, that 4 different opinions as to what actually is the cause of a child being born as a mamzer. But the Mishnah clearly says in Chagiga that once someone is a mamzer, that cannot be rectified. You cannot fix up is someone zeshahil mamzer. But what about the law by mamzer is that the pasuk says clearly that even the 10th generation, in other words, all future generations remain mamzedim. So how do we somehow or another fix that up? Is there any way possible to remove the mamzedim from future generations? That's the most question here. The Mishnah says as follows. Rav Tarfon comes along and says, the Yerushalmi says that Rav Tarfon is called the father of Klal Yisrael. Doesn't really explain why. So some want to say, if I remember correctly, that this is the reason, because he was the only one who came out of the way how to fix up future generations, something which was so difficult, and yet he went out of his way to find a ruse somehow that the person who's a mamzer should be able to fix up his future generations. Because in the end of the Gemara Harius, we learned about mamzer tam chacham comes before a kain ha'aretz. So mamzer, on the one hand, has all the dinim of a Yisrael in every respect. The only thing is, cannot marry into Kahal Hashem. So we feel that if we can somehow or another rectify, let's do it. So I'm saying that's why Rav Tarfon is called the father of Klal Yisrael. So the Mishnah says, Rav Tarfon says there is a methodology here, and that is when Rav Samach Tes Amud Aleph, Yechoilin Mamzeidin l'Torah. He says that there's a way of how to be metayer to cleanse future generations of mamzer. Ketzad, how is this done? He says as follows: Mamzer shenasa shivcha, a mamzer who marries a shivcha kananis, so a non-Jewish maid who's forcibly converted, and we learned already before that her children belong to her master. In other words, the father has absolutely no connection, no link to these children. So if a mamzer marries a shivcha, the children are avodim kananim, and then if they are set free, they become full-fledged Jews, but they're not mamzedim because the father's input doesn't exist, and he's the one who's the cause of the mamzer. Is a havlad, the child, ebed is an ebed, shichra, you set free the child, nimtza haben ben chayde, the child now becomes a free person. And Rabbi Eliezer says, hareze ebed mamzer. Rabbi Eliezer says, I disagree. Even though the father is not considered a father, but as far as mamzedus is concerned, it continues to pass on, and there's no way of ridding this concept of mamzedus. Till we learn a few days from now some other ways, maybe, but at least you cannot do it in a deliberate way. So the first thing I want to know is Rav Tarfon saying that it's an very we know that a Yisrael cannot marry a shivcha because it says in the pasuk lo yeh kaddish. You should not become an abomination, and therefore you cannot marry a shivcha. According to many, it's an iser in the Torah. According to the Rambam, it's merely an iser de Rabbanan. But regardless, there's an aveda. Is a mamzer included in this iser of lo yeh kaddish? On the one hand, why should a mamzer be different than anybody else? On the other hand, because the mamzer is already a kaddish, so maybe he's allowed to, he's already an abomination, even though it's not his fault, and therefore he can marry a shivcha. The Rishonim already asked, why should a mamzer, we just gave an introduction, a mamzer is exactly identical to any other Yisrael, has all the same din. The only thing is he has a negative, an avera, he's not allowed to marry into the Jewish community. So if a Yisrael cannot marry a shivcha, why should a mamzer be any different? So Rabbein Tam explains, all other Yisurim, it says, don't do this, don't do that. by shivcha, it doesn't say don't marry a shivcha. Had it said don't marry a shivcha, then there would be no distinction between the mamzer and everybody else. But rather it says you should not turn yourself into a kaddish, and then we say by living with a shivcha. So because the Torah worded in such a way where a mamzer is not really included, because the mamzer is already a kaddish. Therefore, because the mamzer is already a kaddish, maybe the mamzer can live with the shivcha. So the Gemara says, Ibailu, Rav Tarfon, Chatchila Kama, Deva Kama, Rav Tarfon. Is he saying that even the Chatchila, nothing wrong with a mamzer marrying a shivcha and go through this process, and then the children are no longer mamzerim? Or the Ever Kama, he's saying, of course you're not allowed to, but if you did it, the outcome will be that the children are no longer mamzerim. Which one is it? Toshma coming here from a conversation that Rav Tarfon had with the Chachamim. The Chachamim said Rav Tarfon, those who disagree with him, and it sounds from here that in plural, that everyone disagreed with Rav Tarfon, and maybe that's why Rav Tarfon is called Av, because he stood there and he fought on behalf of these, innocent people. You made it easier for the males, but you didn't make it easier for the females. Right now, the Gemara thinks as follows: that it makes no difference a male or a female if you're allowed to marry shivcha. Then just like a man marries a shivcha, the children are no longer mamzerim. If a woman who's a mamzeris marries an eved, the children are no longer mamzerim. That's what the Gemara thinks. So the fact that the Gemara makes a difference in male and female means the Gemara thinks right now must be that the whole thing is b'di'evet. No, really, if you came forward and said, I am a mamzer, they would not allow you to marry a shivcha. The owner of the shivcha would not give you his shivcha to marry. So what you do is men travel around. So they will go to another town. They'll claim their nevid. No one knows who they are. They'll claim their nevid, and the rabbi said, okay, the master will say, go ahead and marry the shivcha. But a woman generally didn't travel. Didn't travel around on her own. So therefore, it's not going to happen that she's going to go masquerade as if she's a shivcha so that she can marry a nevid. That's what the Gemara thinks. So the Gemara asks as follows. If you tell me, so if you tell me it's b'di'evet, I can see the difference. But if you tell me lechatchila, there's nothing wrong with an eved, with a mamzer marrying a shivcha, then there's nothing wrong with a mamzeres marrying an eved. And my problem then is, so both of them should be able to marry and cleanse their children. Why are you telling me that it only works with an eved? So then a mamzeres should be able to marry an eved. The Gemara says, what are you talking about? The logic here is if a mamzer marries a shivcha, the logic is that the shivcha's children belong to the shivcha, to her master, and therefore the father has no rights. But if the woman is a mamzeres and marries an eved, the children will go after the mother, the mamzeres. It has nothing to do with the fact that the father is an eved. Of course, the children will be mamzer. How are you cleansing the children? So the Gemara says here, Eved ein l'chayis. The whole point is that if the father has no connection to the children, if he's married to shivcha, that's why you can clean out the children and then all the mamzerim, and then they just get free, and that's it. So the Gemara says, okay, Toshvak, I'll bring another proof. There's Besimcha Rav Shimloi, the host of Rav Shimloi, mamzer haba, was a mamzer. He said, if you came to me for advice before you got married and before you had children, I could have given you advice on how to make sure that your children will not be mamzerim. Now, what possible advice could he give them? He would tell them, go marry a shivcha. Tell this person to go marry a shivcha. But if you're not allowed to, you think Rav Shimloi would advise him to do an avera just because he wants to have children and not mamzerim? The fact that Rav Shimloi said, I'm prepared to give you, I could have given you proper advice, means that the chatchila you're allowed to. Even if the chatchila you're allowed to, then makes sense. It's only the Eved, then my knew. What possible advice will he give them? The Gemara says, who said that the advice that he was going to give them was to live with a shivcha? Maybe he'll give them advice how to turn themselves into an Eved Ivri. An Eved Ivri, there's two possible ways a person can become a Jewish slave. One is that he steals and he cannot pay it back. So the Bezdin will intervene and sell him off to pay what he stole, pay out what he stole. The other way is he's destitute, so he sells himself. And we had the Gemara, if he sells himself, there's an argument whether he's entitled to marry a shivcha kananis if the master wants. But if the Bezdin sold him, then definitely he can marry a shivcha kananis. So the Gemara said like this. You know what the suggestion of Shimloi was? Steal, rob someone, you won't be able to pay them back, and they'll sell you as a slave, as an Eved Ivri. Then you can live with a shivcha, and then there's a good ruse, and the children will be cleansed from mamzeris. Says the Gemara. The man he gives him advice, but he tells him, "Zil genoiv, go out and steal. You'll be sold off as an eved ivri," which obviously is problematic because that also is forbidden. You're not allowed to steal. So the Gemara had a problem of some lawyer giving advice to marry a shikha. Surely you're not allowed to steal. What's kind of advice is this? So Rashi answers. Kaisa says the Gemara could have asked the question and ask another question, as we'll see in a minute. Rashi answers no. The Gemara could have said maybe he then would have said, go sell yourself as a slave, and we'll follow Rabbi Eliezer that says that you could marry a shikha. But one of the Rishonim says an interesting thing, that if you steal and you plan to pay the person back, it's still considered an avera. But if I'm stealing and I plan to pay you back, but I'm doing it in order to do a mitzvah, then maybe it's not called geneva. It's not called geneva. Over here, I'm stealing from you in order that you should sell me as an eved, so that I can then live with this shivcha, so I should have produced children that are not mamzedim. Now, that's one of the Rishonim answer that. You have to think about what mitzvah is that. Is there an aveda? Is there an aveda to produce mamzerim? Let's say a mamzer. Is a mamzer not allowed to get married because his children will be mamzerim? There's no such aveda. The aveda is you're not allowed to marry a Jewish girl, a bas Yisrael. So he marries a mamzeris, and they'll produce more mamzerim. There's no aveda to have mamzerim. So by marrying a shivcha and they'll have children who are not mamzerim, what mitzvah are we doing here? A mamzer, it fulfills the mitzvah puravu when they have children mamzerim. The fact is, he brought children into the world, and you still don't know that. So I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, so the Gemara continues. I have a better question, Gemara. How can you tell me that in the times of Rab Simloi, he said, advised them to become a Jewish slave, and we know that there's no concept of a Jewish slave during the second Beis Hamikdash? Actually, that in itself is a machlekes of Rishonim. There's no concept at all of a slave, or there's no din of a slave that is entitled to marry a shivcha Kananis. Other laws of slavery does apply, but this entitlement that you can marry a shivcha Kananis, that does not exist when there's no yovel. But bottom line is, second Beis Hamikdash, there was no din of Eved Ivri, because there's man when most of the Jews live in Israel. There will come a time soon in Mitzvah Shem when the majority of the Jews will live in Israel, once we can establish that, if we ever can. And then a lot of these questions will start coming up. So does Truma now become Mahator to go into everybody? Is there dinim of Eved Ivri? All that kind of stuff. Anyway, in the Gemara asks a question. The years of Shaloi, Eved Ivri Mehava, was there such a concept? We learned ain't Eved Ivri Noig was Mashiach Noig. There's no Eved Ivri today during the second Beis Hamikdash, let alone in times in the Roim. It must be the advice that Simloi was about to suggest to the host was that Rab Tarfon said that a mamzer can marry a shivcha. You could have married a shivcha and the children would be all right. Shmamina is a good proof. Halacha ki Rab Tarfon. The halacha is like Rab Tarfon. Halacha like Rab Tarfon. So I was saying before why this is controversial is because after World War II, after the Holocaust, there were many instances where people assumed that their partners perished in the camps, and after waiting a year or two or three, they decided, definitely, even though there was no testimony, they had no evidence, they assumed that their partners passed away and they got remarried, and suddenly, maybe 10, 20 years later, they find out that the partner's actually alive. And if the woman remarried, you have a problem of mamzerus. Even though it's nobody's fault, that's a fact. And in the Minchas Yitzchak, there's a letter, a fascinating letter where a Rav from Etzisrael, who's a big Talmid Chacham, says, this is a really heavy shaila. I have a large group of people who are here, who all of them are children of such cases, where their mothers remarried, thinking that their original husbands were passed away. Turned out to be they didn't, and they're all mamzerim. So they came to this Rav. Obviously, this Rav was a big Rav, and they asked this Rav to find a heter that they're not mamzerim. And this Rav then wrote to the Minchas Yitzchak. He says, I don't have it. So if you ever look it up, it's in Chelik Hey Tshuva Mem Zayin 47. And he says, and he asked me, he said, this is a heavy shaila. He said, the guy writes, I know Shulchan Aruch, I want to know, practically speaking, what do I do in this case? So prior to that, there was a rabbi called Rabbi Yaakov Reisha, who was the Chelkas Yaakov. He was asked a similar question, and he really felt that it's his duty to find a way out, because this is like mamish. It's bad enough they had the Hitler Yamach Shemai destroy their families. Now they have to continue living with all the pain that they had. It's totally not their fault. So he came up with the following idea. You should go ahead, roughly it goes like this. You go ahead and you find a non-Jewish girl and you start a relationship with her. And if she falls in love with you, and the only way she can marry you, obviously, she becomes Jewish. But the problem is, if she converts to become Jewish and you're a mamzer, then the children be mamzerim. What do you achieve? Right before she becomes Jewish, you convince her that she should allow herself to be bought as your maid, as your shifcha. And then she goes through conversion. So her conversion is as a shifcha, as a maid. And then all the children that you will have will all be avadim, will be slaves. And then you will set each one free. They'll become totally full-fledged Jews, even though halachically they're not considered your sons or daughters, but they are full-fledged Jews, and they're not mamzerim. And then they get married for forevermore. There's no mamzerim anymore in your family, in your lineage. And then when there's no longer any children, you set her free, your wife, and she's a regular yid with no avdus. That was the suggestion along those lines that he made, that each one should do. The conundrum was that there is no country, a civilized country, that allows slavery today in the full sense of the word. So it introduces the concept of dinah de malchus dinah. You have to follow the law of the land, which according to most poskim is mahatayra. Some say it's midrabanan, but Hadith Rabbeinu Yain and others learned that it's mahatayra dinah malchus dinah. The Ramon Shulchan comes out and says that dinah malchus dinah usurps laws of the Torah. So here we have a whole issue of dinah malchus dinah. Now, this discussion came up 300-400 years ago, where the government made a rule that Jews cannot own slaves, only Muslims. In Turkey and so on, only Muslims, not Jews. So dinah malchus dinah did not allow Jews, and then the rabbis at that time, Mashdam, Maria Lev, and others have a whole discussion. So what is the law? Can a Jew go through this process of shivcha because dinah malchus dinah? And there, one of the issues was, one of the rules dinah malchus dinah is it has to be a universal law. If it only applies to a certain section of the population, not to others, then it's not really it's not considered a law of the land. What happens when the law applies to all Jews, but not to Turks, not to, let's say, to the Muslims? Does that come under the banner of dinah malchus dinah, or is that something more like discrimination, which it probably was? So that's one issue. But apart from that, the issue is whether they have Kanani or not. So the Ramah says that we usurp the laws of the Torah and we follow the Machuzina. So there's no law of slave. There's no law of shivcha today. You can call her a shivcha today tomorrow. It doesn't work. It won't cleanse your children. But the Shach in Siman Ayin Gimel, I think it is, in Chayshim Mishpat argues, or was an Ayin test? So either Ayin Gimel Ayin test. He argues, and there's a long Shach there, and he says that the Torah law ultimately triumphs. When the Torah has no say on a particular issue, then we follow dinah malchus dinah. And so in this case of here, if the Torah says you could buy a shivcha, you can have an evet today. Just because dinah malchus says you can't, but halachically you can, even though you're not going to make her work for you and all that. But technically, you can buy her a shivcha in order to cleanse your children. So that's the big argument, and Chelkas Yaakov relied on that to allow these young people to somehow or another make sure that their children are mamzerim. And Michal Yitzchak seems to favor the other side, not that happy. So that's one of the issues that came about, which was many such shilas abounded, in the 50s and the 60s, in the late 40s. Okay, let's continue the Gemara. Rabbi Lezer says, Rabbi Lezer said, this is Ebed is a mamzer. Oh, Rabbi Lezer, my time at Rabbi Lezer, what's the logic of Rabbi Lezer? Amakra says the pasuk. It says there that a mamzer loy bekal Hashem. He should not come to. So it says loyave. You should have just said loyave bekal Hashem. That loyave, the mamzer should not enter the kahal Hashem. Why does it loyave loy? That he should not come to him. So we're going to say that loy is referring to the child and says halech achapsura. So that refers to the child. I don't care if the mother is a shivcha, if the father is a mamzer. We'll always trace it back to the one who's the mamzer. But Rabbanah says no. Ahu, that pasuk loy is coming to tell you, you're right, it's superfluous. It's coming to tell you, be Yisrael shenos mamzeres. If a Yisrael marries a mamzeres, even though the father is clean, the child is a mamzer. And why do I need a special pasuk for that? Because till now we learned we always follow the father. Apart from being Jewish and not Jewish, when it comes to the work out the Kohen Levi Yisrael, we follow the father. So we would have thought when it comes to mamzer, the same thing. That's why the Torah says loy, an extra loy to say what? That you go even after the father. I would have thought the mishpacha is the base of if you go after the father. Also loy, after it comes along loy and takes it out. But Rabbi Lezer, I agree with you. But so what? I can learn two things from there. Lav, isn't it? Avagad the cuts the base of even though the pasuk is clearly you follow your father, yet when it comes to mamzer and the mother's a mamzeris and the father is not, what are we going to say? Follow the mother. Also loy, after came the word loy, which is extra, and turns it around and says, in this case, mamzer is different. We'll follow the mother. So by the same token, it says that Isha it says that a shivcha and her children belong to the master. In other words, there's no father over here. Also, it comes along and says, but when it comes to mamzer, as far as mamzer is concerned, the father is still the father, and even though the wife is a shivcha, the children will be mamzer. We will take it out and we'll say no. But Rabbana, what do they say? Kol Vlad b'mei shivcha Kananis, they say the father has no bearing, has no relationship with this child of the shivcha, because they say the child, while in the womb of the shivcha, kivlad b'mei behemedam, is like a child inside the womb of an animal, and there is no father. Even though we're learning more b'chaydis, a big argument if between you and others, if chayshishin lezer ha'ab by animals. Do we say there's no father at all, just follow the mother, or do we say that there is a little bit of an influence of the father in that gene pool as well? But here we're saying like there's no influence of the father, and therefore it's only a shift. Now we're up to the last perik of Kiddushin, which is the last perik of Nashim. So now the Mishnah tells us, Asara Yuchsim Olum Bavel. There were 10 categories of people that went from Bavel and to Eretz Yisrael. And what Ezra's aim was to make sure that in Eretz Yisrael, we have all the Bate Dinim, all the bezins are much more organized. We don't care if we have problem cases, because before you get married, the rabbis will say to you, who are you? And they will try to trace your pedigree. And we have Bate Dinim that could do it. But in Bavel, if all the rabbis leave Bavel and come to Eretz Yisrael, who is going to do the due diligence? So therefore, he wanted to make sure they leave Bavel. Everyone in Bavel is pure and so on. It's just in Eretz they have the problem. Not sure exactly how that's going to work. It can only work for one generation, but most of the problems, the next generation, Gerim will come in, Chalolim, the next generation, you have people who marry the people that they shouldn't be marrying. I mean, it's really this. All he did would work for one generation, not the next generation. So you have to work out what exactly the big effort, what was all about. Anyway, 10 groups went all Luba bubble. Now the wording in the Mishnah is all Luba bubble. They ascended from bubble, which is what we'll talk about. Koyanim, Levim, Yisraelim, Chalolim. That's if a Kohen marries someone that he shouldn't marry, like let's say a divorcee, or so a Kohen. So his child is called a Kohen Chol. The Kohen who married the divorcee, he himself is not a Chol, but his child is a Chol. That's Chalolim. And let's say it's a girl, she cannot marry a Kohen. Geirim. Charudim are avodim that was set free. Avod Evet Kanani. Mamzedim, we know what that is. Sometimes Mamzedim is up front in the list, like in more hurries then, and sometimes here, like it's after Geidim and everything else, you put in a Mamzer. You would think that a Mamzer should come before Geidim. He was born Jewish. On the other hand, he was born in sin. So sometimes he comes first, sometimes he's afterwards. Nesini is that nation of Givonim that masquerade as if they were foreigners, when in fact they were part of the 7 nations. And we discussed earlier the machlekes whether mahatoida, you're not allowed to marry them only with the rabbanon, and this relates back to a machlekes we had recently. Leit tischaten bum, you're not allowed to marry them. According to Rabbein Tam and other Rishonim, is talking about the 7 nations after they convert. You still cannot marry them mahatoida. So therefore, you cannot marry the Nesinim or the Givonim, the same people. You cannot marry them mehaTorah, even though they converted. They did convert. You cannot marry them mehaTorah. Others learn no, like this chatan behem. So according to Beitam, living with a goy, this chatan is not is not what cannot be talking about like this chatan, because there's no Kiddushin with a goy. How can there be an avera don't marry? There's no marriage. Others learn no, like this chatan means you're not allowed to marry a goy while they're a goy. Once they converted, you're allowed to. So the Nesinim, technically, you would be able to allow them to marry into the Yiddish nation. It's only a punishment that David Melch was grazer on them that you cannot marry. Shtuki is someone that we don't know who the father is. And a Sufi is someone we don't know. So the question is the child a mamzer or not a mamzer, but definitely Jewish because we see the mother. And a Sufi is someone that we have no idea who the origins are. Found a kid lying there in the street in a basket. We don't know the father of it, we don't know the mother is nothing. So now the Mishnah spells it out. Kohen Levi Yisraeli, Kohen Levi Yisraeli can marry each other. Levi Yisraeli, Chalali Gedim, Churudi, the next category, Levi Yisraeli, Chalalim Gedim, Charudi, they're all allowed to marry each other. Geide, the Charure, Mamzide, when it's in a gate and an Evet Kanani who is set free, which is also another form of gate. And a mamzer, we had a few days ago an argument, Rav Yossi and Rav Yehuda, whether a mamzer is allowed to marry a shivcha. This Mishnah holds yes, because it says that because a ger is not considered. Sorry, a mamzer can marry a giyadis, because the question is a ger or giyadis considered part of Kahal Hashem? One opinion is now that they're full-fledged Yidden, yes, and the other opinion is that no, they're not part of Kahal Hashem. And I guess maybe it boils down to, how do we understand the concept of a ger? We had in the Gemara Yevamos, the Gemara says there that in the Mems that the Eivishter is upset with the gerim. Why didn't you convert earlier on in your life? Why did you wait till then? And the question is, what is a mitzvah for a guy to become a ger? What are you upset for? Whenever it comes to ger, it's a good thing. So the Chidah learns, brings a Ramban. Why does ger shin is gayer? You should say goy shin is gayer. So he learns that every ger, before they convert, they're Jewish already. They have a Yiddish neshama, and that's what causes them, that makes them yearn for Yiddishkeit. You know, a true ger tzedek is because they already have a Yiddish neshama. So they're a ger before even they converted. Ger shin is gayer. They were a ger before they converted. So therefore, those, if you learn that way, then they're part of the Kol Hashem, because they're already Jewish even before they converted. So they're part of the Kol Hashem. And the other opinion says no, that it's not pshat that they're already Yid before they become before they converted, and therefore they're not part of Kol Hashem. If they're not part of Kol, then a mamzer could marry them. Let me continue. Mamzer and Sine, Shtuke, Vasufi, Kulam Matorla, they all marry each other. Regarding this Asufi, we have no idea who it is. Why do we even think that the child is Jewish? So we'll see more later. The Eilehem Shtuki. What's a Shtuki? Koshu Makris, he knows his mother, but Veina Makris does not know his father. Asufi, what's an Asufi? Kol Shenesib and Ashuk Veina Makris, he doesn't recognize his father, recognize his mother. Abashola, you call your Shtuki of Duki. Abashola is to call Shtuki somewhere that we investigate. Says the Gemara, that we can investigate as the mother and so on. Asadi Yuchsim Alababum. 10 categories. My idiot, the Gemara asks a question, why does it say Alu mid Bavel, that they ascended from Bavel? Nisnu should say Holchu, like they made the voyage to Eretz Yisrael, or they went on their sojourn to Eretz Yisrael. What do you mean first of all, why does it say from Bavel, and why do we use the word Alu, they ascended? So the Gemara says, Milsa Agav Ucha Kamashlam, we learned something by the way. Kitani we learned. The Kamta Lisa Lamok, we're talking here about a Zok and Mamre, the person who rebels. And you know, and the Lichvas Hagazas you have in the major Sanhedrin and the Beis Hamikdash. So the Kamta, so it talks about going to the Beis Hamikdash. It says the Kamta the Olisa Elamok, you will go stand up and you will rise and you will ascend to the place that Hashem chose. The Lamed Beis Hamikdash going to Eretz Yisrael. Beis Hamikdash is the highest point of Eretz Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael is Gevoya Mikol Arotzis. Now, why does it matter? So there's a fascinating marshal, the Yam Shlomo. The Yam Shlomo says if a person makes the following statement. He's in Eretz Yisrael. He says, he's in Yerushalayim. He says, I am going to go up to Tzvas. Let's go up to Tzvas. Says the Mashal, if he used those words, exactly what I just said. Let us go up to Tzvas. We will give you 39 lashes. And because it's a neder that you can never keep. Because you can never go up to Tzvas. As we just learned, Tzvas goes up to Yerushalayim. So that the Mashal learns the Gei Halacha L'Maisa, how people speak. If you should say you're going down to Tzvas, and or you're going anywhere in the rest of the world. If you're going from Israel anywhere in the world, you never say you're going to go up somewhere. You're going to go to, or you're going to go down, but you never can say I'm going up, because Eretz Yisrael is the place that's up. Everything else is down. So interesting, the Mashal takes this Gemara literally, because obviously it's difficult when it shows the highest point and all that. So some people learn it's a ruchazik thing, a spiritual thing. Other than some says, the world is a ball, and if the world is a ball or a sphere, so he says if you could find the place where the sphere begins, then everything else facing in that direction is going up to it, even though physically they might be taller than everything else or higher. It doesn't matter, because that's the beginning point. And since we know the world started from they gathered all the dirt together there by the Mokkah Beis Hamikdash, and that's where the world came from, the Medrash says the Cham Sofer, therefore we're entitled to call that the peak or the summit or the apex, and everything else is lower than that, because they all came, the derivative from this. It's as if they are facing it, and that's going to go back to its source, to the top. This mentioned earlier that there's a fascinating Cham Sofer in Yeridea, I think it's Tshuva Reish Lamed Daled, where he has a whole debate there, and he quotes a Sefer, I think it's Chesed Avram, where the Chesed Avram argues that today Yerushalayim is no longer the holy place that it used to be, because there's no Beis Hamikdash, and he quotes that the holiest place in Israel today is Tzfas, and the fact that all the Kabbalists moved over there is because it's a very holy place. The Cham Sofer constantly says Chas v'Sholom to say that, but this Sefer does say that. And I didn't see the Sefer inside, just for some Sefer quotes, but that person, it seems, advocates very strongly that Tzfas should be considered the holiest place in Israel. And one of the arguments that the Cham Sofer has, which is really hard to understand, one of the arguments is, but Tzfas is not as high as Yerushalayim. Tzfas is lower than Yerushalayim. I don't know, if you travel to Tzfas, you got to go up the mountains there. So so I'm not sure. Anyway, the Gemara continues.
Its elevation is higher than Yerushalayim.
It is.
Yeah, I checked.
So Cham Sofer then is not asking from a historical point; he's asking from the Gemara that says here, L'Poy Yerushalayim is the highest point. So how can you say Tzfas?
Tzfas is 937 meters elevated, while Yerushalayim's only 700 something, 754. Close. They're close.
Okay. Well, when you go from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim, you continue to go up and up and up. It feels like you're going thousands and thousands of meters up.
Yep.
Okay. So you want Bishlayim, Beis Hamikdash, going to Yisrael. Beis Hamikdash is higher than any point in Yisrael. High Neksiv. We have a pasuk. Dibur Sherecha. You have any arguments in your community? The Kamta B'Alisa Yisrael. The Kamta B'Alisa go up. El Yisrael Gavoy Kol Ratzminol. High Neksiv is the highest point of the world. The Chsiv, it says Ilchein. Yirmiyah said Ilchein. Therefore, Hine Yomim Boyim Num Hashem. The day will come, says Hashem. Lo Ya'amar Oid. Nobody's going to say anymore. Chai Hashem Shehel B'nei Yisrael Mitzrayim. That that Hashem shall live, who took Eden out of Mitzrayim. Ki Im Chai Hashem Shehel. He took Eden out and ascended. V'Asher Hevi Ezera Beisol Eden. Me'eret Tzafona from the north. That's Iraq. Never understood really why we call Iraq the north. It's really much more east than north, isn't it? If anything, it's northeast, but it's much more easterly than north. You could check it out if it's more north or more east. And all the lands that I reject you to, sit in the land. So what do we see from here? That all the lands, it says Hele, Hashem had them ascend. So we see it as the highest point in the world. So the Gemara. My area, okay. So you explain why it says Olu, why we use the word Olu. You're ascending. But why focus on leaving Babel? Talk about that you Olu to Etzom in Aliyah. Everyone says you're making Aliyah. In fact, that's why we say you make an Aliyah, based on this Gemara right here. So you're asking, my area the Tani Olu Babel. At least you say Olu Etzom. You went to Etzom. Says the Gemara, this L'chayra supports Rabbi Lazar. The focus is on Babel, what Ezra did in Babel. Ezra did not leave Babel. He cleansed it out. And only then did they ascend to Eretz Yisrael. So that's why the Mishnah says Olam Babel, because there's a lot of work done in Eretz Yisrael and Babel to separate and segregate those who are questionable, their pedigree, versus those who are definitively, kosher. Eat what we learned. Abaya Amad Olam Aleim. The people who volunteered and went themselves. And why would they volunteer? So that's an interesting thing. Rashi says in Babel, everyone knew them, familiar with them, and they knew that these people are all question marks, and they thought it would be a problem with Shidduchim. So they thought if they go to Israel, nobody knows who they are. They can start all over again. There won't be any question marks. So, their own benefit, they volunteered to go, not because they were tzaddikim and and they're following Ezra. They went there to sort of to start again. Abaye says Olam Aleimta on their own. The Rava says He'elumta. The Rava says that Ezra actually forced them to go up. Ukemifli b'Rabbi Lazar. They're arguing Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar says Loi Ola Ezra b'Bubble. Ezra did not go up from Bubble. Acha Osa Keselis the Rabbi said that Ezra came in and he segregated the different groups. But only went up. Abaye less than Rabbi Lazar. Abaye says they went on their own. In other words, they didn't want to really be found out. They wanted to go and disappear in Eretz Yisrael amongst everybody else. And Rabbi holds like Rabbi Lezer. No, Rabbi holds Rabbi Lezer actually managed to segregate the two, and he kept a watch over them. Or Boy say, Makuli Amishra, everyone agrees Rabbi Lezer. But Hacha B'Hakim, this is the argument. Marsava Afrushi, Ezra came down, separated everybody, Umanaf Shaisli, then they went on their own. And Marsava Bakochayas, he had to actually force them to go. Says the one who said Olu went on their own. All the countries are inferior to Yisrael when it comes to shidduchim, when it comes to finding out who, the yichus of every single family. But Eretz Yisrael, Yisrael Bubble, Eretz Yisrael is inferior to Bubble. Why is Eretz Yisrael inferior to Bubble? Because all the people volunteered to leave Eretz Yisrael, and no one knows who they are. Not everybody who went with Ezra was a person with a question mark. Some were and some weren't. But because Ezra didn't choose them, they went on their own, and the purpose was to mix with it, to mingle, and to be forgotten. And we have Ezra is definitely inferior to Bubble. We understand that. Elamandam and Halum, the one who says that Ezra went in and he handpicked every single person that was questionable, and their yichas, and he sent them to Yisrael. The Mediyadina, we know exactly that Yisrael is no worse than Bubble. In Bubble, we know all the good people, and so we also know who the good people are. They knew for that generation, but not future generations. So it sounds from here that when Ezra cleaned out Bubble, the people there realized, the situation they're in, and they made sure that they all behaved properly, and married people that are correct for them, so that they can continue having that. That name, that they are, everyone here is tired and kosher. You don't have to do any investigations, no due diligence, because everyone's all right. Tell you what, further, Olu, the one who said they went on their own. In other words, Ezra had no idea who they were. Then it makes sense what it says, that after they left Bubble on their way to Yisrael, it says, I gathered them all together to this river, El Ahava, and to this place called Ahava. We rested 3 days, and I started to examine the people that were with me, I didn't find any members of the tribe of Levi. In other words, he had no idea. Why had no idea? Because they all went on their own. That he went and handpicked them. He knew exactly what he had. He knew exactly who he had with him. What do you mean? Something he discovered. Says he is here b'psulim. He was only monitoring carefully all those that had question marks on them. But the people who had no question marks, he didn't monitor. And he suddenly found all those Leviim. So Taisa says, and Rashi says, Taisa says on top of the page, what do you mean he didn't find anybody Levim? In the Mishnah says clearly there were 10 groups of people that went with Ezra, and one of them was Kohanim, then the Levim. It says Levim. So Rashi and Taisa both say that the Levim that went with Ezra were all disqualified from doing Avodah, because on the way to Babel, with Yirmiyah, when they went to Babel, the Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to play their musical instruments from the base of Mikdash, so they all bit off their right thumb, so that they should not be able to play these the harps and all that. And as a result of that, they were disqualified to do any avodah in the base of Mikdash. So, of course, he had Levim, but not those who can work in the base of Mikdash. There is an argument we had in Gemara Sukkah at the end. What's the main avodah in the base of Mikdash? Is it singing, or was it the playing the instruments? So this, according to Rashi Teis, at least, the main avodah is playing the instrument, so they were disqualified. If the main avodah is singing, so what are they missing a thumb? They can still sing. So obviously they hold the main avodah is playing these instruments. So says about it further. The Mishnah said Chalala gave Chirudi. Chalalim, how do you know that they had Chalalim in their crowd? The Tanya we learned, that chazaka, which call assumptions, is so powerful that the chazaka we had then when they left Babel was more powerful than normal chazaka. In which regard? Shenemar, it says in Pasuk, with Bnei HaKoinim, amongst the children of the Koinim, Bnei Chavya, Bnei HaKoitz, Bnei Barzilai, the children of Chavya, the children of Koitz, the children of Barzilai, Asher Lokach b'Bnei Barzilai Hagiladi. They all took the daughters of Barzilai Hagiladi as a wife. They were all called after the name of Barzilai Hagiladi. And it says, Eile Bikshu Ksavim. They started then to look for their documents to prove their yichus. Hamas Yachsin, or the yichus, so they couldn't find it. The Golam and Akahuna, and therefore they were sent away from their kahuna. So then Nehemiah, who was called Tashata because he was actually a minister by Nebuchadnezzar, he was also the butler, the Sar HaMashkim, and Nebuchadnezzar, who was very suspicious of everyone, had the butler Nehemiah drink from every batch of wine a little bit of wine first, in case Nehemiah thought that he'll live to poison, or somebody wanted to poison. Nehemiah was the guinea pig. So Nehemiah got a special permission from the Rabbanan that he should drink the wine, even though it's Tam Yenim, it's wine from a goy. So that's why he was called Tashita, the one who drinks the wine. He said to these kind, okay, you cannot find any evidence who you really are. So we'll treat you like a cholol, like a kohen cholol, which means whatever you did in Babel, you can continue doing here, but you will not be able to participate in the kochim, the kabbanas that come on the Beis Mikdash. Adam would until a kohen comes back to the Tumim, which Mashiach will come. But Amalem, he said to them, that you now are in your chazakah. Now, what does that mean? That you continue to maintain what you had before. What did you eat when you were in Babel? They ate the truma, the local truma of Babel. There's a big argument when today if truma is mahatayr rabbanon. In fact, the argument resurfaced when Rothschild paid in the 1880s. They started all of these fields and everything, agriculture farms. Then all these shilas came up, and actually the Avaneza has some number of trumas that he was asked. Truma today, mahatayr midrabbanon. All these questions came up. It hasn't been discussed for hundreds of years. It wasn't, unfortunately, Negea. And so the big machlek is of Truma today's Mahatayra Midrabanan, that we say because we don't have Be'yovel, when other Beis Mikdash, Truma is only Midrabanan. But in Babel, definitely Truma was only Rabbanan according to everybody. So he said, you ate Truma in Babel, continue eating that same Truma Rabbanan. Afkanami B'kachigul, that Truma that you had there, you can eat over here. So only Truma Rabbanan. So he says over here, and they were treated like halal. Now the Gemara asks a question, but 1 second, it's not so simple. If they're going to eat truma in Eretz Yisrael, people automatically going to assume they're full-fledged kohenim. They're not going to be treated like halalim, and they'll marry. And if it's a girl, they'll marry a kohen. How can we allow that to happen? The opinion that says if you see a person eating truma, we'll assume that they're 100% kosher, and therefore if it comes to yichus, we'll say this is a good family. If you allow them to eat truma in Eretz Yisrael, we're going to elevate them. That they're pure. So when it's a shiny hasam we're not worried. You know why? Because we disallow them from eating any kachim. They cannot eat the kabbanas. Everyone automatically knows they're not really full-fledged kohenim. Otherwise, why can't you eat? Why can't you eat from kabbanas? Yeah, the Gemara. Be'ela said the Gemara, my gedoyle chazaka. So what do you mean gedoyle chazaka? You're telling me that they continue eating whatever they ate in Babel, the truma d'rabbanan. So what's the big deal? The meikara achal b'truma d'rabbanan. Well, besides achal b'truma d'raisa. In theory, once they came to Israel, the truma is mahatayra. Let's assume that even the second base makes mahatayra, or at least the first base makes, let's say in theory, and they would be able to continue eating truma d'raisa. L'chayr from here is that truma d'raisa even during the second base of Mikdash. Because we're talking about after Ezra came up, and now we're elevating. Why? Because of the chazakah. Because you in Babel you behaved as if you're a kohen. We'll allow you to continue that way as if you're a kohen. On the other hand, we think you might be a chol, so we're not going to allow you to eat from the kabbalas. The boy said another answer is la'olam hashtanami b'darabbanach b'daraisa. Here also we'll only allow you truma d'rabbanan. Truma mehat Torah is wheat and wine and oil, according to most Rishonim. The Rambam holds fruits are also truma mehat Torah. Everyone agrees, however, that vegetables, truma is only midrabanan. We actually paskin that fruits, even back then, was only truma midrabanan. So we're only allowed to eat truma midrabanan, not truma which is like grains or wine or oil from Atayda. The chimaskinin mitruma liyuchsin. And this question that you had, why aren't we worried, that concerned that people will think the full-fledged kohen? That thing that going from yuchsin from truma to yuchsin is only if they can eat truma from the Torah. But midrabanan maskin, all they can eat is limited to truma and drabanan. I'm not worried. So my gedoyle chazaka is, what's the big chazaka? The mikara. I'll tell you what the chazak is. The chatchila lekel and migzin mishum truma deraisa lebesayf. While they were in bubble, it was never capable of eating truma ma'atayra. So if we allow them to eat truma rabbanon, there's no issues. However, I am the besayf coming out to Israel. Okay, we allow them only to eat truma rabbanon, but why aren't we worried that if we allow them to eat truma rabbanon, tomorrow they'll eat truma from the Torah? Maybe we should prevent them from eating truma altogether. And that's what the G'dayla Chazak is. Because we allowed them to eat in bubble Truma Rabbanon, we continue to allow them here, and we can dismiss this concern. Now, even though we can be guys at Truma in the Torah, b'derabbanon achol b'deraisa l'achol. Only Truma Rabbanon can eat in the Torah, and we're not concerned that we'll make that leap. Says the Gemara. But it says in the pasuk, the only thing he denied them was to eat from karbanis. And you're telling me now in the second answer, they also did not eat truma from the Torah. Where are you getting that from? So the Gemara, it says by Yema Tashla to them, you shouldn't eat from karbanis because Kedoshim don't eat karbanis. How come everything else you can? Says the Gemara, Hachikama. The word Kodesh HaKadoshim, led you to believe we're talking about karbanis. No, we're not. Kodesh is one category and Kedoshim is another category. Loi, midid the mikra kodesh. I don't want you to eat anything that's known as kodesh. Loi, midid the mikra kachim, nor anything that's known as kachim. Loi, midid the mikra kodesh. It says chazal kodesh. So the zor should not eat kodesh, which is truma. Loi, midid the mikra kachim. Also, don't eat anything kachim. So the word kachim is referring to kabbanis. The word kodesh is referring to truma. And we learned what is it referring to over here when we say that a bas kohen who married a Yisrael forfeits her right from eating truma sakachim, even though we find the word truma. Truma here doesn't mean truma. Truma means what's lifted off from kachim. That goes to a kohen. The moedim in a kachim.